Thanks very much, Ollie Barrett. Welcome to an extended edition of the Richie Allen Show. It's just after 4:30pm this Tuesday, September 18th, as I talk to you. There's a reason why I've extended the programme. I've added an extra segment to the show last minute today. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. I'm live now on Fab Radio 2, TuneIn Radio, triggerwarning.tv and Cogent Radio, as well as richieallen.co.uk. This is your show. Good to be with you. I hope you've gotten the notices that I'm on a little bit earlier on. And you can tweet me now and at any time between now and 7pm UK time at Richie Allen Show. That's the Twitter handle, at Richie Allen Show.
Welcome back to the most listened to independent radio show in Europe. It's your Richie Allen Show. It's the Richie Allen Show. Broadcasting live on richieallen.co.uk and multiple platforms around the world. And now, here's your host, Richie Allen.
Now, a listener to this program tweeted me this morning with a link to a video on Facebook where a lady was apparently uploading live to Facebook a video from a mental health facility in Surrey. And her name is Susanne Small. And Suzanne alleges, and alleged to me, is that because she spoke to her doctor about her concerns about Wi-Fi and 5G and radiation, because she took evidence to her GP surgery about that, she believes that she was sectioned, which means that the doctor advised that she be given a psychiatric evaluation. Now, Suzanne says she was taken against her will to a hospital in Surrey where she currently remains. I managed to get a mobile phone number for her and I spoke with her about an hour ago, 90 minutes ago. That conversation, you will hear that in a minute. It is startling. That which she alleges is startling. It's coming up in a couple of minutes' time. Paul Craig Roberts, former US Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, of course under Reagan, great friend of ours. Paul will drop in and we'll be talking, of course, about Russia and Syria and Israel and the downing of that plane. Where's all that going to lead? And later on in the programme, I'm delighted to welcome Jim Lee, who's been researching for many years the subject of weather modification, the weaponisation of the weather and all of that. Fascinating man. Delighted that Jim accepted my invitation to come on the programme. So Jim will be sometime just after 6pm UK time when Jim will be live. So it's an extended programme today and I'm glad to be with you. As always, it's been a very interesting day. Now, before I go any further, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping. I spoke with a lady on the programme last week called Posey Parker. She's a blogger. Not her real name, of course, but she's a blogger. She's a feminist and she's got a lot of very strong opinions, many of which I share in terms of, safeguarding issues around women and trans women. And I invited her on the programme to talk about that. Now, when I'd spoken with her previously, she said that she'd been having running battles with people on Twitter. That's fair enough. We've all had running battles with people on Twitter. And she said that she was being attacked and she was worried about certain things and her safety and all of that. Now, I said to her before the interview, which was live, don't mention anybody. I don't want you to mention anybody by name. We can talk about how emotional, how highly charged the debate is around this issue, but don't mention anybody, which she did mention somebody. Anyway, she mentioned a chap called Mac Harrison, and she said to me in the conversation last week that she had the hump with Mac big time, suggesting that as part of this Twitter war of words about the rights of trans people and about the rights of feminists, she implied that Mac had been putting pictures of her children on the internet. Now, when she said that, I said to her she shouldn't do that. I'd asked her not to. And I said, if this wasn't the case, I said, I would hammer you, right? And I asked for proof of that. Now, she didn't send me any proof of that. I've given her a while for her to send me proof that people were... And I went on to the Twitter feeds of all these people involved and I couldn't find any proof that anybody had been doing anything like that. Now, Mac Harrison, to his credit, got in touch with me today to say that he'd heard the interview and he wanted to strongly refute the allegations that he posted pictures of Posey's children. That's a complete fabrication, said Mac, and anyone doing that is beyond the pale. And he sent me a link to a thread where he'd been discussing Posey Parker, whose real name is Kelly J. Keane Minshall, and Mac believes strongly that what she's doing is hateful. And he makes no bones about that. And he says to me that because Posey is publicly stating that she is standing for governor of a school where she has said unpleasant things about a trans parent, because she has implied trans people are a danger to their own children, because she has called for sterilisation of trans for men, I'm concerned about that, and I would be talking about that basically. And that he feels that it's right that the school where she wants to be, or purportedly wants to be a governor, Mac says it's only right that I let that school know what it is that she's been saying. I strongly disagree with her, and I want to reiterate, at no time did I tweet pictures of her children or about her children, he said to me. That's beyond the pale, and it's not right. Thanks to Mac for reaching out. I naturally said that some of the opinions Mac has about trans women, I don't agree with, but if he wants to come on this programme, like everybody else who disagrees with me, he'll be treated properly, fairly and with respect, and I've extended that invitation to Mac. If he wants to come on, he wants to come on. What do I think about Posey Parker? I don't feel bad about her. I liked her. I've seen that she said some things, right? She's expressed herself in ways that I wouldn't express myself. But like I said, I share a lot of her concerns about safeguarding issues around women. And I shared a lot of her concerns about free speech around these issues. And I'll be inviting her back on the programme again in the future. No matter what you feel about any of these issues, if you want to come on the Richie Allen Show and you've got a point of view and you can express it articulately and you can show me that you've got an interest in this issue, and you can prove to me that you've got an ongoing interest in the issue. If you disagree with me, it doesn't matter, I'll bring you on. Right. Okay. Now, the reason we're on early. Ian McKee, I think it's Ian McKee anyway. Ian, sorry if I got your surname. I think it is Ian. Ian sent me a link today, listener, to a video on YouTube, on Facebook, which I'm no longer a member of. And it's an action group that raises awareness about 5G, about Wi-Fi, about radiation, and many other issues. And a woman called Susanne Small managed to upload a video to that group, purportedly or seemingly from a mental health facility in Surrey. Very articulate, very well spoken, and she told a story about how, having noticed that a brand new mast had been erected near her home, she hadn't been feeling well. She'd gone to her doctor to talk about this. She was very forthcoming with her doctor, telling her doctor about 5G and about Wi-Fi and how this non-ionising radiation is very dangerous for human health. The GP didn't agree. Suzanne wouldn't have any of it and sent through email a avalanche of information to the GP about the harmful effects of this radiation. She might have mentioned, well, I won't tell you what she mentioned because she tells me in the interview anyway. The upshot was, later on that day, a couple of people came from the local, presumably local social services, health workers, to see was Suzanne okay. She wouldn't speak with them. And because of that, the following day, the police turned up with mental health workers, with hospital workers, and they said that Suzanne was going to be sectioned. She was going to be taken to the psychiatric hospital where her mental health would be evaluated. Suzanne refused to go, but she was told in no uncertain terms she had to go. She had no choice in the matter. She was going, and that was the end of it. So I managed to get a mobile phone number for her, rang her today. Must point out before we hear the conversation with Suzanne, despite the fact it took me 20 minutes to do so, and I spoke with some very, not so much belligerent, but very resilient and very reticent people at the hospital, I eventually confirmed that Suzanne is in fact there. She is there. and she had been taken in there yesterday, as she told me. Of course, they wouldn't speak about her case, and quite right, none of my business, but I was masquerading as a friend of hers, and I just wanted to see, was she comfortable? I was put through 4 different people before somebody eventually said, yes, she is here, it is the right person, and she's comfortable. And that was that. So this is my conversation with Suzanne Small, London woman, who's in a mental health facility in Surrey right now as we speak. This is rather extraordinary. And this is her telling me her story today. Have a listen to this. Suzanne, look, first of all, thanks for taking the phone call. Where are you and why are you there?
I'm in Farnham Road Hospital, Farnham, Guildford. And, well, I actually don't really know why I'm here, but I can only make an assumption. It's because of something I did. Maybe it was a little bit silly. But just to give you the background of it, a couple of months ago, my neighbour and I both started experiencing headaches and some lethargy and bits and pieces, and didn't feel quite right. And I'd gone out walking with a dog. This was just about 4 weeks ago now, which was after the headaches had started. And I'd noticed a massive new phone mast. Now, I knew 5G wasn't enabled because it wasn't showing us 5G or anything on the phone. But I spoke to 3 and I thought, well, I'll just check and, see whether, what's happening. And the manager there confirmed that it was indeed a new, larger capacity mast, but that 5G wasn't on yet. So, I know that it's not actually activated, but my concern was, well, is this what's causing the headache? Not quite sure. I then continued to do some further research into the 5G implications, which I'd already been aware of some of it, just, I kind of hadn't thought it was coming to England yet. So I found a bit more research and stuff, and then I decided to take that research to my GP so that they could then figure out, are there a lot of people getting additional headaches or symptoms, and to just give them a bit of information to be aware of my symptoms. And I also spoke to the fire service in Purley. And who else was it? So I spoke to the fire service, and the doctor basically didn't want to look at any of the evidence at all. So I got there, and instead of looking at the evidence, and I had a whole bag of it. I had my laptop with me, I had various papers with me, I had all the information, all the sites I wanted to show. She literally didn't want to look at it at all. She just came at me from the angle of, you've been under a lot of stress, and no, I haven't. I'm fine. And it was clear to me that I needed to get the hell out of it, because I got the impression that she just wanted to section me at the time. I had that horrible feeling.
Why did you think that at the time? Did she say something to give you that?
She wasn't willing to look at any of the evidence, and then she started going down the road of, how are you feeling? You seem very, very stressed. Well, obviously I'm stressed because I'm coming to you with evidence of something that's potentially harmful, and I wanted them to listen, and she didn't want to know. So I just got a bad feeling about it, which was right, because later on that evening, I started getting withheld calls on my phone. And the next day, I'm literally just chilling out in the garden. My son's around with his girlfriend, making dinner. And there's about 6 or 7 police outside, 3 or 4 mental health professionals. No one had conducted any form of assessment with me. All I had done was my face-to-face scene with the doctor, trying to get her to look at the evidence that she wouldn't. So literally all of these people came in. The decision was already made that I was getting sectioned. There was no discussing it, because the mind had already been made up, and they were just basically arguing with me that you must be delusional and 5G and blah 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 blah. And you mentioned something about President Trump. Can't remember what I said, but they were basically just trying to make out that I was some nutter. And they asked me my opinions on Trump, funny enough, and I said, look, I'm not political. I don't vote, so I'm not going to get into that one with you. So it just seemed like they were trying to kind of put words in my mouth. It felt very uncomfortable. But yeah, that I just couldn't believe it. That literally, from the minute of going to my doctor's, the day after, I had 2 people knock at the door.
So the day after,
the door to.
So Suzanne, hang on.
After 2, the day after 2 people knocked at the door, and I didn't answer it, and I just said,
right,
look at the information on 5G. I'm not letting you in, kind of thing. Had no idea they had any capacity to come back and then break the door down. So next day they come back. There's not the same people, but that's when there were all the police and a load of doctors. And then I was forcibly removed from my house and forcibly brought to this Farnham Road Hospital. Now, it's not even an open hospital. I've got bars on my windows.
There is bars on the windows?
Bars on my windows. Yeah, there's it's not proper bars. It's like a mesh, if you like, but you can't open the window. Anyway, you can't get out of the window.
Let me get this timeline. Let me get this timeline right, because thanks for clarifying that, because in the video you said you saw the doctor, and then later on a couple of people came around, but you spoke to them through the window. The doctor was the first day, and then the people coming to the house
was the next, because I think I saw the doctor, it might have been Thursday or Friday, and then the people came after that, and then literally it was yesterday that the police and everything came. So there were a total of 3 incidents. There was a reporting of it, then the next day there were the 2 people turned up that I didn't speak to, and then yesterday the final kind of sectioning and all the police and all of that stuff.
Tell me this,
I can
Suzanne.
only assume they did that because I didn't speak with their mental health people apart from through the window.
That makes sense, because I was going to ask you, did the 2 people who turned up to have a chat with you identify themselves? Did they say, we're from?
Yeah, I knew who they were, but by then, because I'd suddenly thought, oh my God, I've just raised the whole 5G thing. Are they here to try and commit me? Which they obviously were, or wanting to. I had a feeling in my head that I was safe in my own home and that you can't be committed in your own home, because that's something that I'd heard that obviously wasn't even true. And the next thing, the police are trying to break down the door, and I don't still even understand why they consider that I can be committed, because all that form says is that I need to be assessed and they think I've got a mental health problem and that they can keep me here for 28 days.
28 days. Let me just remind.
Yeah, they can keep me here for 28 days apparently under this section.
Let me remind our listeners listening to this. Suzanne Hall is on the line. I came across Suzanne today because I was tweeted a link to a video that Suzanne has made today from a mental health facility in Surrey. This is extraordinary stuff, this. I was immediately struck by how articulate and how lucid and, how nice Suzanne sounded. And she's told this, frankly, incredibly disturbing story about not feeling well, about knowing there's a brand new mast in the area, speaking to the telecommunication provider who confirmed the mast was there. Suzanne went to her doctor and said, listen, I believe that this technology may be harmful and may be causing people to feel unwell. The doctor took the conversation in a different line. Suzanne felt it was sinister. She left. Later on, a couple of mental health workers turned up, wanted to converse with Suzanne, who didn't want to speak with them. And then later on, the following day, the police and an ambulance and mental health workers come along and tell Suzanne that she has no option but to come with them where she's going to be assessed. And amazingly, she's speaking to me today from a mental health facility in Surrey. I just can't believe this, Suzanne. This is crazy.
It's unbelievable.
No pun intended.
And you know what? This place, the patients are lovely, but they're kind of dribbling,
Right.
They all think I work here. I'm making them coffee. They all think I'm a psychiatrist here. All the patients think I work here. And it is an extreme unit. There's a woman on 24-hour guard that's like throwing herself on the floor. Obviously I've got a lot of empathy and stuff. I'm not trying to take the piss here, but I don't think I should be here. I'm a woman that has had legitimate concerns over 5G. I've got a son who's 21 years old. If this is going to cause him to not be able to have kids, if it's going to cause him neurological problems, I don't give a shit if it's going to upset my doctor. I expected them as professional healthcare people to at least look at the research and the evidence, but she wouldn't even look at it. And that's why I got upset. And because I got upset, they're using that as she's unstable. No.
Well, you're honest now. You're very
Someone
honest.
you trust isn't doing anything about something.
You're very honest there. I mean, look, before we talk about whether you've been assessed yet, has anybody spoke to you, we'll talk about that in a second. But you're honest to say that you became a bit upset. I mean, listen, I'm an Irishman, Suzanne. I can lose it with the best of them. When I think somebody's not listening to me and I've got a point, I can get a bit highly strung. Might you have gone a little bit over? Yeah, go on.
I just said, well, you obviously don't give a shit. And then in my email it said, you're not on the side of humanity, and if you are aware of this, then it's criminal. Right. And I still stick by that. And then actually, I think their reaction is because they do know. Now, if at some point all of this comes to fruition, I think those people should be prosecuted, because if they're giving vaccines to children that are knownly causing autism or whatever it is, I mean, I don't know for a fact that that's the case. I'm just basing it on information that we start to see. But if it is the case, they have a duty of care and they have a duty to preserve human life, and they are not doing that. I believe that our government are acting outside of the Constitution, and that's why I'm here.
And this is now. So you emailed the doctor later on. Obviously, you were a bit irate after you left. Fair enough.
Yeah, with an email basically saying, "Look, here's the information. I can't believe that I got people sent around to harass me after coming to see you about." I sent her the stopthecrime.net site because I thought Deborah Tavares has done a good job of collating a lot of information in the same place. So I figured that was a good thing. And then I did a Dropbox of the recent appeal that's got all the great scientists and renowned scientists that know what they're talking about that have all signed this thing. And I sent that. Now, if they don't want to look at it and they just want to get me committed, what is that saying to you? It's saying that they don't give a shit about the problem.
I mean,
they don't give a shit about human life.
I'm taking you at face value, and I am taking you at face value because we've never met before. And like I said, I stand by what I said, articulate, lucid, obviously passionate about it. I mean, I am. I share your concerns about these things. I speak to people, not always activists. I often have academics from some of the, most well-known institutions, educational institutions, who agree with you in terms of your concerns. This is outrageous. What has anybody seen you to assess you yet at this facility?
Well, I had an assessment earlier with the doctor because I said to her, look, what's the difference between conspiracy and mental health? And she obviously is clear, because even if the stuff I'd researched was wrong, let's take it as an example, it was fake news, whatever, that still doesn't make me insane. I still have a right to opinion, and I have a right to say what I think, and freedom of speech, and that is what's not being allowed. But as it happens, there's a lot of credence to the information, and if anything, it's the professional services that are acting in an insane manner by not taking it seriously and by not listening to people. But so my mum and dad are in Spain, and my sister is a recovering alcoholic who can't cope with any stress whatsoever. My son, I definitely don't want to put it onto. So basically, I'm trapped in here. My mum's on her way back from Spain.
Have you been able to speak to anybody else before you spoke with me?
I've been speaking to a few people who are aware of my plight because they're on the Facebook groups, probably those that have notified you, which has been quite good. There's been a chap called Lee who's been really helping me as well, saying that they're going to come down from Newcastle and help get me out of it.
Wow. I mean, the reason I ask that is because you obviously need somebody from a legal point of view.
Well,
you need help, right?
Now that they're saying they might let me out, it might be Friday, but the question is, do I need to wait till then? I just don't know. It looks like I might not have no choice, because there's another option where you can go to kind of a tribunal thing, but that's 2 weeks. So if she's suggesting I might be out when she gets back on Friday, then it's better for me to just wait. But the point being, then what do I have to do after that? Am I going to have to start checking in with a home care team every week and tell them, no, I don't think 5G is a danger now, I'm all fine, and what am I, a clone with a smile on my face now? Like, what?
We'll send you off to a re-education centre where you learn never again to have an opinion on anything.
Yeah. Well, thank God I didn't mention MK Ultra. And you know what? I literally had to not mention half the stuff. Oh my God, I just can't, it would be so good if we had a big cleanse of the swamp over here, wouldn't it? But at the end of the day, my concern is that this can happen to me, and I'm a professional woman who's worked for 20 years, project manager in a professional capacity. It can happen to anyone. It really can happen to anyone, and this shouldn't be allowed. It just shouldn't. All for a conspiracy.
Well, it's not all for a conspiracy. It's all because you've asked a question. Yes, you're asking questions. Listen, only this week I had a professor emeritus from Washington State University on this programme saying that, wait for it, Suzanne, saying that when this is rolled out eventually, we're going to see on a massive scale infertility. Basically, nobody will be born. He reckons it's going to be the death of birth. And this is an academic, not a conspiracy theorist. He's an academic. Yeah. And I'm worried about it.
To add to that, I used to wear my BlackBerry around my waist for many, 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 many years, and I suffered a significant number of miscarriages, which I now believe could have been relating to that. Now, I don't know about other women. I don't want to start getting people worried and upset about this stuff, but it is an important thing to think about, because we don't know. Maybe at that time 3G was even causing a problem. We really don't know the true effects of this stuff, and we don't know how it's affecting fertility because we're not getting true statistics, because we're just not getting honesty from the government, and that's why there needs to be a significant change. There's not been
a single human health impact study done on this technology. This is just going to go ahead without any testing of it, without any looking at it, despite many men and women, again, from academia saying, listen, this is very dangerous and this should be properly, thoroughly researched before being applied, but they're just going to roll it out. And that's the way it is.
They don't care. And the point is, we don't even need faster than 4G at the moment. And why the hell do we want to get a shitload of ugly looking antennas putting up? It's going to look like all those solar wind things do. It's going to be everywhere. It's going to look hideous, and there's going to be no escape. They're also on the motorway just outside my house, just down the road from my house. It's like about a mile away. They are installing smart meters to motorways now. So you're going to have, you've got your Sky Q box, you might have one in each room, that's 4 lots of Wi-Fi, and your phones, that's another 4 lots. And then you've got your smart motorways, then you've got smart bloody everything, haven't you? So literally, and if this is all going to be thrown at us at 400 times the radiation we're currently getting, if it's 400 times, I think it was around there, then you can imagine the consequences.
You won't be able to get away from it, is what you're saying. And that's right, you won't be able to get away from it.
And they plan to put it everywhere. And that is the problem. And the thing is, we don't need it. Who was asking for it? Who needs it? I don't need it. Do you need 4G? Perfectly fine.
Perfectly quick, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. There is no need for it. Yeah.
And if anything, the current the current routers and stuff could be made better. They could be protected more for us to stop these harmful signals. There are ways to make these things safer, but they're not doing it.
My God, Suzanne.
So this is what needs to change. Now, I'm not an expert, but then there's a guy, I can't remember his name, Brian someone, Deborah Fitzgerald had put him on one of her documentaries, and he did state that they needed to conduct at least 15 years worth of tests, and they were told do one lot of testing in 15 minutes and the other lot of testing in 10 minutes. So they got the right results, but obviously you're only doing it for 25 minutes. The phone wasn't put on somebody's ear, the phone was on a desk.
It wasn't on somebody's person. That's right, it wasn't in their pocket.
And if you look at the small print, they'll always recommend, you should use your headset piece anyway. But most of us don't know that. We don't always have a headset to hand. And the worst thing is if you've got little babies that are playing on mum and dad's iPad.
It was nice of you to say earlier on that when you talked about your miscarriages, and look, I don't know what that's like, but when I say I'm sorry to hear that, I genuinely mean it. And you were right to say that, look, I can't prove one way or the other, but I'm going to say, if you are pregnant and you're listening to this program, or you do have very young children, don't have those phones anywhere near your body. Just don't.
No, not at all.
Simple as that.
Not at all. And it kind of defeats the point of the phone as well. But what I do always now as well is like put your phone on Wi-Fi mode at night. Try to put it on Wi-Fi mode when you can. And apparently, if you have a number of cars in a phone, it's meant to be extremely dangerous as well. So that's another thing to think about. And to not use things like the GPS. But then we're getting away from the whole point of these phones. And actually, maybe we need to reconsider our use of them. Maybe there needs to be something, or we need to make sure we don't go past 4G and we actually look at the existing 4G and we make that safe. 5G, I just can't understand. Whoever's put this in is a psychopath, to be honest. Whoever designed this plan, whoever come up with the idea of it, they're a psychopath, because this is not what humans need. Why do you think the bees already are dying out? We know it. We can feel it. We're sensitive. We're sensitive creatures, and we're being literally attacked in all directions.
BBC,
with fluorides, with GMOs. And
BBC Nature presenter Chris Packham wrote only weeks ago in one of the broadsheet newspapers that he was in the New Forest this summer and there are no insects. Why is that? Why have insects disappeared? Why did I drive to Cornwall 5 weeks ago? I drove 7 hours down from Manchester. I got into Cornwall. I did not have to wash bugs off the windshield. Why?
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. In your face. I cannot believe I'm speaking to you now. I'm not trying to oversell this. You are on Farnham Road in Surrey. You're in a mental health facility.
In a mental hospital.
Where you're being kept against your will.
They haven't lithiumed me up, but that'll be your next step. I mean, if they force medicine on me, then you won't get any coherence, and that's my absolute dread. Because I don't take any drugs or medication.
I don't think they can do that. I mean, later on they might ask you to take.
They can. Yeah, apparently they can.
When did you go in again? You went in last night, did you?
Yesterday. I mean, you know what? The funny thing is, the policewoman came up with me while I got just a couple of bits, and she knew that it was wrong. And I was like, is there anything she can do? She's like, I don't know. I said, nothing I can do. And literally, they knew it was wrong. Because I was like, this can't be legal. How can I do this?
Of course it's wrong.
Literally, I was perfectly sane. I mean, yes, I was upset and I was walking very quickly, like I always do. But it just, I just literally couldn't believe it. I felt sick. I didn't sleep a wink last night. I feel sick as a pig. I'm a type 2 diabetic and I have a very special diet because I don't want to take metformin. That makes you sicker. And so literally there's nothing for me to eat. I'm eating bananas. So they're going to maybe work on allowing me to go escorted out with a credit card at some point to buy some suitable food.
But you'll be escorted?
Yes. In case I run away.
I mean, you're not suicidal. You're obviously not suicidal.
Not at all.
Not at all, right? So who else could you be a danger to?
I've been passionate at trying to promote the information and awareness of things that I think are, not doing us any favours. Like, we all know that Monsanto just got sued. Was it 229 billion for the fact that the GMO food
over glyphosate? That's right.
Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So, if I'd have said to the doctor, oh my God, I don't want to eat food from Aldi that's got GMO a year ago, what would I have been committed then as well?
That's a great point.
It's silly. And then one of the doctors, when he was speaking, says, do you really think that the government are going to allow you to bust a part of these cell phone towers if they're dangerous, Suzanne? And I said, well, what happened with smoking? What happened to the tobacco industry? But, I mean, literally, the guy that was trying to section me he was awful. He was just a patronising, condescending, I don't even want to say. But to me, I was under attack from all angles, and it was awful. It was bullying, it was harassment. It was a very scary, intimidating position to be in, you know.
I can't imagine it. And you have my genuine sympathy there. Is there anything at all? I mean, this will be going out on the radio in a couple of hours' time. But in the meantime, is there anything I can do for you? And, you know, is there anybody I can call? I mean, it's great that you have the phone there at least and you can chat. But is there anything I can do? Or do you think there's anything any of our listeners might be able to do?
What I'd like to do is, I mean, I'm hoping I'm going to get out of here. I don't want to make too much of a fuss until I do. But what I'd like to do, I think we should be able to take them to court for what they've done. I think we need to put exposure on the other side. I think we need to put them under the limelight. How? I don't know. We need legal professions that understand the law. We need professions that understand our constitution, that can get back to our constitution. Because at the minute, I don't think there's any form of law.
Not when people can do what's been done to you. And the great thing is, of course, the correspondence that you sent to the doctor, it's all there, it's all on the record. So if there's nothing in that, in terms of if there's nothing that could be, that somebody could say, well, look, this lady is obviously unwell and we were worried about her self-harming. There's obviously nothing like that in the documentation.
Yeah, exactly.
So you might very well have a case.
I'm not going around, I'm not being aggressive, and if at the end of the day the cell towers go up, it's not that I'm, you know, what will I do? I'll just have to try and limit my access and just try and be more careful. I mean, God knows what any of us are going to do. But it's as if they seem to think, what do you think, I'm going to go around and start attacking people? Like, honestly, I'm not an aggressive person whatsoever, so it just doesn't make any sense. So to me, I just don't think they had any real reason. I think that the doctor was concerned because I think she knows. Now, another thing that was weird was when I first called up, I spoke to a receptionist that I've known for years, and I explained about this 5G, and she said, well, I know what you mean, but what can we do? So I thought, okay. I said, well, we need to change. We need to make a change. Her name was Maggie. Now, so this was on I think it was the Thursday or the Friday when I'd first gone. And then when I went to see the doctors on the Monday, her name was Sue Crispin, the manager of the practice. Maggie was like, she's really busy, she won't be able to see you. But I kind of said, look, I really need to see, I've got a load of information and evidence. Maggie's like, leave it with me. I'm like, I'm not leaving with you. I'm not leaving it with you.
Yeah, you want to give it to her personally.
And then I waited to speak to the doctor, who basically told me to bugger off. But the thing is, Maggie before that had been like, I know what you mean, but what can we do? But when I came to see her to speak to the doctor, I hadn't got an appointment, by the way. I just showed up very early at 8 o'clock in the morning because I was like, I need to speak to the doctor to show this information because I knew it was all three related and to the new mask and stuff. And Maggie's attitude was very, very different. And literally, Dr. Crispin hadn't wanted to see me. Now, if you think someone is having a mental breakdown, wouldn't you want the doctor to sit with them straight away? That didn't happen. They were trying to send me away. But I tried to insist to speak to the doctor, and then, as a result, have ended up here. So to me, it wasn't a welcome in. They didn't want the information. She wanted me to leave the evidence so they could probably throw it away.
Yeah, I mean, she's not here to defend herself either. I've got to point that out. And her actions, I don't agree with what has happened to you, and I share your worries and your concerns about this technology. But I'm also well aware that many doctors and many healthcare practitioners, they're not protecting anything. They just genuinely don't believe us. They don't. And she might have felt, and I'm sure she would argue, that she felt that she was acting in your best interest. Now, she wasn't, obviously, but maybe she felt she was, and she's not here to, to say otherwise. But it's terribly wrong for me to be speaking to you now on a Tuesday afternoon. Again, I go back to what I said earlier on. Lucid, articulate, obviously bright. I'm not patronising you by saying that. That's what I got from the video. And you've been very candid about your worries about this technology, the way you express them. You're forceful and you're determined to be listened to. Again, there's no problem with that whatsoever. For you to end up in there is an outrage, in my opinion. That's just my opinion. It's an outrage.
Well, I think the reason for it was because I mentioned the genocide plan in that email. Now, the reason I mentioned that was because Deborah Tavares, when she talks about the burning of Northern California and the directed energy weapons and the 5G, she mentioned Agenda 21, 2030 quite a lot.
And you mentioned this to the doctor, did you, Suzanne? You mentioned Agenda 2130.
On the email that I sent, I wrote, I think I said something like, the guise of climate action plan and Agenda 2130 and genocide. I think I'd mentioned those things in there because they were specific to the information I was linking to from Deborah Tavares. Now, they might have thought, oh, this is what she thinks, but I was more, I'm not the one that's come up with Agenda 21 or the theories of what it means.
Do you know what, Suzanne? Do you know what? On that, this is really important. You're going to want to smack me in the face now, and you can if you want. I absolutely believe Agenda 2130 is a real thing. I've had
so do I, but
people
I
talking
can't
about
say that while I'm in here, or I won't be let get out.
Well, see, this is the thing, and this is why I wasn't. When I said I have sympathy of sorts with the doctor, I have more sympathy for the doctor now, even though you're right. It's a paradox, right? Because the doctor doesn't know anything about any of this, and when they hear it and they hear global genocide, they think it's barmy, and they think, wow. Now that doesn't make her right. But I can forgive that because at least she's being genuine. She thinks it's crazy. It isn't crazy, but she thinks it is.
I did put the hammer down. I think I shouldn't have done it all at once. I should have done it in breadcrumbs.
What do we say about two things? We talk about drinking and dialing, don't we? And then we talk about sending emails where we're very passionate. Maybe we should put it in drafts and wait for an hour and have a look at it again. But you didn't. You just sent it straight away. All right, fair enough. These things happen.
The thing is, and this could be paranoia. It might not be. I've got the videos. I can send them to you. Maybe you can have a look and decide. But literally a couple of weeks ago, not even anything to do with doctors because I hadn't liaised at that point, but I'd been posting a lot of stuff about 5G and kill frequencies and bits and pieces. Now, I'm living in quite a remote area. There was a military-style, one of these yellow and black helicopters, massive one, just going round and round my house. It was so loud, I was like, shit, like, why are they going round and round my house? Like they were looking through my windows. And I was thinking, oh, my God, I hope they're not here for me. And then at that point, I started thinking, oh, maybe I've been opening my mouth a bit much, but I'm about the good grace to shut it before I went to speak to the doctor. And now I'm here.
Well, I sympathise with you. Look, I've done the amount of times I've said something and then wished that I had just kept it for myself for a while. If I had £1 for every time, Suzanne. Tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to go for now. I'm going to put this on this afternoon's programme because our listeners are absolutely desperate. I did a YouTube live stream earlier where I was just promoting the show for today and who was coming on. Yeah. And I mentioned you in the live stream. And the comments just went crazy. What's happening to this lady? Find out what's happening.
If there's any way to send someone to get me out of it, that would be much appreciated. But I don't think it's going to happen because I think I've got through a lot of shit and tape that I'm going to have to jump through. But fingers crossed. At the start of the meeting, it's Susanne Small, SMALL, by the way.
It's Small, not Hall, right? Small.
It's Small, not Hall. Small. But my legal name is Sands, which is why people didn't know that I was in here because I was using a different name when I came. So a bit of confusion on the name, but Small is the one I go by on Facebook.
And it's Suzanne Small, and if anybody wants to find Suzanne, you'll find her on Facebook. And I did mention.
Well, you'll find two accounts because funny enough, my first account I got hacked out of it after sending driving license, passport, and stuff to Facebook. Couldn't get my account back, and that's because I was posting a lot of stuff at that point too. So there's two Suzanne Smalls. The one with the hat on is the one that I've got access to.
The one where you're wearing a hat, okay.
Yeah, I know, and see, funny because I could never get my account back from Facebook even though I sent all my evidence. So that in itself is why didn't you give my account back? Because I was doing activism stuff.
I tell you what, I'm sorry you're in there. And you think you're going to have to be there till Friday at the earliest.
Well, that's what they're saying, but to be honest, if the other doctor that was the one that came to section me gets back on the scene, he wanted to keep me here, and I'm just concerned as to is there something untoward going on? And are they going to try and keep me here and start stuffing me with lithium? Or am I indeed going to get out Friday? At the minute, that's what I've been told. But I feel quite afraid because I certainly don't want any doping whatsoever. Because the people here are not in a good way. Not in a good way.
Right.
At all.
You've got, because I rang you from my mobile phone earlier on, so you've got that. So save that. And when you can, when there's an update, let me know when there's an update, when you hear something, and I'll do the best I can to get that out there. We've got a very big audience in this country and elsewhere.
No, sounds good. And can you send, I know you've got me on Messenger now, would you be able to send me a link to your show and information?
Absolutely.
I had some nice messages from Aslan's Army as well today. And funny thing is, I've been watching a lot of Aslan's Army. I mean, I watch Patriot Soapbox. I've been looking at, all the Red Pill guys and stuff like that. So whilst I don't participate actively with these groups, I watch them. I'm very much loving them. And then I do my own little bit to try and, help on my side, and never expected to get locked up because of it. But you live and learn. Yeah.
Your good mood. Well, do you know what?
You're being sectioned now.
Being sectioned. I mean, you're there, and your humour and your good mood is, I suppose, testament to your character. Like I said, I've only met you today. Look after yourself in there. Don't be. Look, I can't give you any advice, and nor should I. But you sound upbeat and you sound positive. Just be yourself when you're speaking with people, and don't worry about.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do, and I'm actually trying to have just chat with the patients and stuff, and help out some of the other patients in here, because there's some quite vulnerable people. But it's quite a nice experience, really. The worst thing for me about this whole experience is not just about the fact the doctor wouldn't listen for 5G, which makes me then concerned for everyone's health for the future. In fact, my parents have had to come back my mum's had to come back from Spain on her own and leave my dad there with a dog. And it's my mum and dad both for their birthdays this month. I've ruined my mum and dad's birthdays, and they're having to haul back to England because of this. And it's such a shame. It's a real travesty,
When you need them around you.
And they can't just get a flight.
When you need them around you, and I'm sure they'll be absolutely outraged. And like you said, there may be legal remedies available to you when this is all settled. You might have, a very good case, because it's essentially... Well, there's so many issues there, habeas corpus being one, of course. I mean, this idea that they can just, because of opinions you have, because of questions, however strongly you might have expressed that, but for them to say, oh, we think we need to bring you in for observation, and the fact that they can do it, it's very sinister. Yeah. It's sinister in the extreme.
And at one point, the guy had said, well, look, we've got the options of bringing you into hospital or having your home care team come every day. So I said, I'll have the home care team every day. He goes off, oh, no, we've decided we should bring you into hospital. The guy was just an idiot. And then trying to say, well, I'm wrong. And I said, what's to tell, how do you know that what you're reading is any more true than what I'm reading? It's just a difference of opinion. It doesn't qualify whether someone is mental or not. It really doesn't. The insanity is more put to a doctor that doesn't want to look at evidence where you can see someone is at risk from a 5G cell tower. That to me is more insane than me raising it. They also said, why didn't you speak to your MP? Why did you call your doctor? I wouldn't have done that. So it's as if I made the wrong judgment call. And I'm like, well, hang on a minute. If my doctor's the one that you go to if you have a headache, they're the ones that are going to be the first line of if these 5G towers are making people sick, because people go to doctors when they're sick. They don't call their MP. So none of it was making any sense. Plus, I don't like Theresa May anyhow, and I haven't voted for it because it's all been corrupt. It's only now I'm hoping that we're going to get a party that we can actually trust. But God knows, because how deep is the deep state? That's the question.
Yeah. Well, look, keep in touch with me through my mobile number. Thanks for taking the call today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. And I hope, if anything, this is going to bring some, highlighting to what we're trying to bring people, their awareness up on. So
I've never seen anything like it, Suzanne. I mean, what I'm going to do now when I get off the phone with you, before I play this on the live show this evening, I'm going to put it on YouTube even before I do the live show, and I'm going to start putting it out all over Twitter and get my friend to put it on Facebook, because I'm not personally on Facebook anymore. I gave up with it. I got fed up with it months ago. Got fed up with being banned from it. So I said, well, to hell with that. You know what I mean? Like yourself. So I'm not on there. Keep your spirits up. I'm glad that you're in touch with your son and your friends. Thank God you have that mobile, and thank God your family are coming back to support you there. But it's an outrage.
Thank you for having me.
Listen, anytime. Keep us informed, and send us a text when there's anything. And of course, we'll have you back on again when this is over, all right?
Sounds good.
Legend. Mind yourself. Thanks, Suzanne. Bye for now, Suzanne. Bye. Cheers. Yeah, it's fairly surreal, really. There's a woman in a mental health facility and by the way, just to reiterate something I said at the top of the programme, I was able to independently verify by phoning the hospital, getting the runaround admittedly, but eventually they acknowledged that she was there and that she was taken in yesterday. And she's there because she strongly, she said herself, she went to the doctor, she told her about 5G. Later on she emailed the doctor, and in the email she sent her evidence linking the harmful effects of this type of radiation and the damage it does to human beings. She mentioned genocide, she mentioned Agenda 21, Agenda 30. The doctor said she should be sectioned, and she's currently being evaluated in a hospital in Surrey. That is true. By the way, very good question came in from Patrick. I've given myself a slap on the wrist, Patrick, because I did ask this of Suzanne before we spoke, and I should have brought it up into conversation. And that is, had Suzanne been sectioned previously, or had there been any mental health issues previously? In the pre-interview, I did ask her that. Like a plonker, rushing around as I was, I didn't ask her. The answer is no. She's never been sectioned, ever. Never been treated for mental health issues or for depression or anything like that. Never. First time she was ever asked to account for her mental well-being. That is bizarre. There has been dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of tweets. I'm not going to get through them because I'm running out of time. Got to get Paul Craig Roberts on in a minute, and we've also got Jim Lee coming up later in the programme. To see what other people are tweeting me, go to twitter.com and it's at Richie Allen Show. Big shout out to Ian, who's a listener to the programme, who made that happen by sending me a link to a video that Suzanne had made and uploaded to Facebook. Cheers, Ian, and thanks to Suzanne for doing it. And I wish her well, and I hope in the next couple of days they let her out and we can talk again. And I hope that something will come of it, because it's an outrage and it's an easy thing to say, and I'm not paying lip service to it, that somebody can be treated like that because of an opinion. We'll be back in a minute.
There's a place high in the mountains of Spain, a sanctuary where souls gather from all around the globe to learn about themselves and experience powerful changes in the way we see our world. They become awakened to their gifts and their power to heal others. Become part of this ever-growing worldwide family of unique, pure energy healing practitioners. Discover how amazing you truly are. Go to www.markbayerski.com. It could just change your life forever.
Have you lost access to important data from a computer hard drive, mobile phone, or other storage device? Maybe you have a broken hard drive containing years of information, or a smartphone that no longer works from which you'd like the pictures, movies, and chats recovered. If you would like to recover data from any type of digital device, including desktop and laptop computers, external hard drives, cameras, smartphones, NAS, and RAID servers, then contact Data Clinic today at dataclinic.co.uk now.
Welcome back to the most listened to independent radio show in Europe. It's your Richie Allen Show.
Welcome back. Extended programme today. If you're just joining the programme, we've been on since 4:30 p.m. this afternoon. Live across Fab Radio here in Manchester. TuneIn Radio as well as richieallen.co.uk. Just before we say hello to Paul, the Israelis are blaming Syria for the deaths of 16 Russian airmen or aircrew that were shot down by Syrian forces after Israel launched an air raid on the city of Latakia. So Israel said that it expresses sorrow for the deaths, but it blamed extensive and inaccurate Syrian anti-aircraft fire. Russia had blamed Israel for irresponsible actions, but President Vladimir Putin said today it was a chain of tragic accidental circumstances. So that's a change in tone from Putin. The Russians were very aggressive in terms of the language they were using earlier on, and some reporters, BBC and Sky reporters, were talking about retaliatory action. This is serious stuff nonetheless. My next guest is no stranger and needs pretty much no introduction. You can read him daily at paulcraigroberts.org. paulcraigroberts.org. Check him out. He's a brilliant writer and author, of course. He's written for many publications over the years, and of course he is a former US Assistant Secretary of the Treasury. Always love having him on. Paul, welcome back. How are you?
Thank you, Richie.
Really good to have you on. Before we talk about all of this, I really enjoyed reading your piece about your website and about how objective and real reporting and journalism is pretty much dead the world over, and that people need to identify sources where the information is true and honest and opinions are honest and independent, and they need to support it. It's a brilliant piece, Paul, and people should read it. So what about what happened overnight? Before we talk about recent articles on the site, today's articles, what about that shooting down of that Russian plane by Syria accidentally? The Russians said initially that Israel deliberately forced the plane into anti-aircraft Syrian fire. Now Putin seems to be rolling back on that, saying it was a chain of tragic accidental circumstances. Whatever it is, Paul, it sounds to me like it's very serious.
Well, it's not serious unless Putin treats it seriously. It appears like he's not willing to do that. What happened, as I understand it, and as the Russian Minister of Defense explained it, and he certainly would be the one that would know, the Israelis cloaked their own attack behind the Russian plane that was landing, so that they used it as a cloak, and that is why the Syrians accidentally shot it down. So it was something that the Israelis did on purpose. Now, why would they do that? I don't know. I can speculate. Maybe the Israelis hoped that the Russians would get mad at the Syrians, and that Israel would be able to make a wedge out of that and use its influence with Russia to get Russia to back off the protection of Syria. So whatever the Israeli reason, it certainly upset the Russian military. Now, Putin's statement is not going to go down well with the Russian nationalists, because it looks again like he's running from the facts because he wants to avoid conflict. And as I have emphasized for some time, I understand that Putin is responsible and doesn't want conflict because it can very quickly get out of hand and lead to nuclear weapons. And so it's a responsible position that he takes. But on the other hand, the more he accepts these provocations without any response, the worse they become. And sooner or later, he'll have no choice but to respond. And at that time, it's much more likely it would be a major issue that would lead to major conflict. So I think the policy is sensible. It makes sense insofar as it goes, but it ignores that when you accept provocation, you get another one. And that's what we see consistently happening.
With Israel?
With Russia, they accept the provocations from everybody.
Yeah.
Even tiny little Israel, they could wipe out in 3 seconds. And they accept them from militarily impotent UK, that stupid prime minister you guys have over there. They accept them. They accept them from Washington. So they accept them from Ukraine. So as long as the Russians just accept these provocations, they're going to keep having them. They seem to me they get worse. They get worse. They get more irresponsible and more insulting. You know, this whole Skripal poisoning thing is clearly an orchestration. There wasn't any nerve agent. How can it be a deadly nerve agent and nobody dies?
Laughable.
Yeah, and so the whole thing just gets more and more insulting, and now the Russians have lost I don't know, what is it, 16 airmen?
Yeah, 14
and an
16.
airplane, and so I think that Putin is undermining his own support inside Russia. Particularly from the nationalists, who are beginning to see this as cowardly behavior, as a refusal to defend Russia's honor. And he's already in trouble because he let the American-trained Russian economists trick him into that pension reform, which raised the pension age on everybody. So he's in hot water with that, and now he's making excuses for what clearly was an Israeli deception, an intentional deception. That's not going to play well. So I think he's ruining himself, and I understand that it's very responsible of him to avoid conflict. But you can't really have a war and win it without conflict. And the Russians are on the verge with the Syrians of liberating the last
Idlib,
province.
yeah, that's right.
Idlib, and they seem to have backed off of that because the Americans quickly stuck some troops in there with the Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, ISIS people that the Washington supports. So they figured, okay, if the Russians attack now, they'll kill our soldiers and they won't want this conflict. So the kinds of response that the Israelis and the Americans and the British and apparently the French and even the Ukrainians are giving to Putin, I think are destroying his credibility at home.
Here's a question for you on that. Whenever you come on, now you know this to be true. I'm not just saying this to to make you happy, but whenever you come on, a lot of people join the program that have been reading you for years. And one of them is a friend of mine actually called Phil Restino, who's based in Florida. Phil's an activist and reads you avidly. And he says, Richie, I admire and respect Dr. Roberts beyond anything, but I can't believe that Russia will save the day in Syria if it's against the wishes of Netanyahu and the Zionists. If anybody can get deep down into this, it's Paul, says Phil. I wish that the independent media would investigate more the relationship between Putin and Putin's government and Netanyahu and Israel. I don't believe that Putin is as independent of Netanyahu as people think. Now, we know they had meetings regularly enough, didn't they? Before the summer recess, Netanyahu visited Moscow and, he seemed to have a very affable relationship with Putin. That's a concern for a lot of people. Paul, what do you think about that?
Well, I don't think any of us know enough about it. It's clear that during the Yeltsin years, the Americans and the Jews got firm hold of many parts of Russia. I think Putin has been trying to roll that back and has had some success. Most likely, I'm just having to speculate based on what information I do have, that Putin is trying to be diplomatic with Israelis and move them aside with diplomacy rather than ultimatums or force or threat of force. He may be under an illusion. He could be deluded that he can do this, but I suspect he's trying to maneuver the Israelis diplomatically in order to avoid a conflict. He may think, I can make a deal with them and maybe separate them in some ways from the American position and so on. It could well be that that Putin or his advisors don't understand that the only reason the United States has been blowing up people in the Middle East for 2 decades is Israel. We went in there for Israel to get rid of those governments that were in Israel's way, particularly Iraq, Syria, and Iran. Why are they in Israel's way? They were the financiers, the supporters of Hezbollah. Now, Hezbollah is the militia in southern Lebanon. Israel wants to annex southern Lebanon. It wants the water resources. There's a big river in the south of Lebanon. They've twice sent the Israeli army in to occupy southern Lebanon under one pretext or the other, and twice the Israeli army was driven out by the Hezbollah militia. So twice the vaunted Israeli army was simply defeated and driven out. So Israel's not willing to risk that a third time because there goes its military reputation. So it's trying to use the American forces to destabilize the countries that support Hezbollah in order that Hezbollah runs out of supplies, runs out of backing, runs out of money, and then Israel can take southern Lebanon. Now, it could well be that Putin doesn't understand that. Another big puzzle about Putin is he keeps talking about fighting terrorists together with America. Some people think that the reason he actually went into Syria was to get into the terrorist fighting operation in order to make friends with America. Well, of course, the terrorists are not independent of Washington. They are Washington creation. It's what Washington uses to destabilize countries. So it could just well be he's just not well advised. The Russian intelligentsia, the foreign policy people, they just don't get it. That's entirely possible. So that's my kind of answer. I think we'll have to wait and see how this plays out. Most likely there'll be another provocation, because here he is apologizing for Israel, who just killed 16 Russian airmen. That's not going to play well in Russia for Putin to be apologizing for Israel or giving it an excuse. You know, it's kind of like what President Johnson did for Israel when Israel attacked the USS Liberty, and I think the casualties was something like 208 American sailors. And you know, but Johnson could keep it all secret, but Putin can't. This isn't secret. The Russians know. So it may force some change of direction on Putin. He may have tried to avoid conflict in a way that won't go down well with Russia.
It's a good answer, that. It's a fair answer, and it's multifaceted. There are many possibilities there. To finish on that point, you wouldn't rule out then the possibility that many of our listeners are putting out there, the possibility being that the type of influence that Israelis and the Zionist lobby wield in the UK and in France and in the United States, and nobody's written more about that than you, it's not beyond the possibility that they might have that influence, but just not as public. They might have that same influence over Putin and his government, but it just might not be as obvious. It's a possibility.
It's a possibility. I don't know though what it would be based on. Like you see in England and the US, the Israelis simply purchase the government. I mean, the United States Congress is owned by Israel, and so is the Trump administration. You know, one of Trump's main advisors is his Jewish son-in-law. And Trump has been, you know, everything Netanyahu wants. He's done. You know, he moved the embassy to Jerusalem. He's done everything. And so I don't see how this works in Russia, how Israel has purchased the Russian government. I think it's got business interests there, and no doubt pays off various people, but I don't see how it could have the same kind of influence that it has in England and the US.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, my friend. By the way, Paul Craig Roberts is live with us this afternoon. Always brilliant to have Paul on. PaulCraigRoberts.org. If you haven't bookmarked Paul's site before, do it now. Read him daily. Great stuff, it really is. I think you might have hit on something, maybe not Putin personally, but the Putin circle of friends and wider business interests. That might be a way to wield influence, Paul, I suppose.
Yes, it is. You see, there are these people that the Saker calls the Atlanticist integrationist. The Atlanticist integrationist in Russia, who mainly want to be integrated in into the West. So they are business people. They are academics who like to get invited to America and give lectures at Harvard. And these kind of people are opposed to the kind of Russian nationalism that has come in play ever since the coup in Ukraine. So these people are influential. They have money. They're the social elite, and they are a constraint on Putin. There's no doubt. There's no doubt about that. It's a constraint, though, that he has to be willing to accept, because he could just as well not accept it. But for some reasons, he's comfortable with these Atlanticist integrationists, or he has some kind of a longer-term plan for eroding their hold and influence. But it is a problem for Russia when you have the important part of the elite basically wanting to be in bed with Washington.
Paul, this is important stuff. Folks, if you've got a tweet, lots of tweets are coming in, understandably. It's at Richie Allen Show. Follow Paul on Twitter, by the way. It's at Paul Craig Robert, not Paul Craig Roberts. But just put Paul Craig Roberts into Twitter. There's only one Paul Craig Roberts. The time is 21 minutes to the top of the hour. Paul's going to be with us till the top of the hour. And you've been writing, Paul, this week. You've been lamenting. And that's why I mentioned that piece that you did, that personal article you wrote about the importance of people who consume the independent media supporting it and not forgetting to do that. When you buy the Washington Post or the Times or the Telegraph here in the UK, you've got to spend $1 or $1.50 or £1. You've got to do it. You've got to support genuine, independent, alternative media, folks. You've got to do it. And you've been talking a lot about it, Paul, in articles. You've written about Washington and how the Matrix is closing down truth throughout the Western world. And you've also written about how evidence is no longer a Western value. Not easy, Paul, for somebody who's been around as long as you, who's written for magazines, stellar magazines, publications, who's written books, who remembers a time when people were free to write about things that were important and they could do so without being censored or without being bumped off. And you've been talking about InfoWars and Alex Jones. And my position is I would be very sympathetic to your position there on what's happening to Alex. Even though Alex has wound me up over the years with some of the things he said, it doesn't matter. These are important times for independent thinking and independent journalism. And you're really worried about it.
I'm very worried about it. Can I first ask you, I didn't know I was on Twitter. I myself don't use social media. Is there a Twitter site with my name on it? I wonder who's doing it.
Oh, see, I didn't know that it wasn't you. This is a mystery now. Yes, there is a Twitter account for you under the name Paul Craig Robert, which I found strange.
Well,
why the S would be missing. Basically, links to the articles on your website, Paul. It isn't anything that would be... there isn't a lot of tweets in terms of somebody's not tweeting regularly and tweeting opinions, tweeting links to your articles effectively. Do you know what it is, Paul? I've figured it out, the mystery. You had some help setting up your website, and somebody has fixed it so that when something is posted on your website, it automatically posts to Twitter. That's what it must be. That there you are now. But we'll figure this out later on.
Okay.
But nobody's masquerading as Paul Craig Roberts, I don't think. I think it's the website automatically doing it. Because when I put something on the Richie Allen website, it automatically goes to Twitter.
Oh, I see. Well, the webmaster may have done something like that. I have a new webmaster. I'll ask him about it and look into it.
Yeah, hopefully it's not somebody, who's cloned your identity, Paul.
Right.
Let's hope it's not.
I got a little worried when I heard you talk about it.
Yeah. And there I was thinking I was conversing with you on Twitter, and it wasn't. It's probably your webmaster. But more seriously, desperate times for the independent media, and it's a theme running through recent articles. You're very worried about it.
Well, the authorities have to control the explanations because their agendas are unacceptable to people. And so they lie. And then to prevent the lies from being exposed, they have to control the explanations, which means they have to shut down the people who tell the truth. And this is underway. This is a full-scale thing. Facebook is doing it. Twitter's doing it. Google's doing it. Apple in some way is doing it. I don't know all the ways that they do these things because, the internet and the digital world came late in my life.
Yeah.
But this is already happening. And it's also happening in publishing houses. The publishing houses now, a lot of things they simply won't publish. Wasn't there a book, Melanie Phillips, London.
Yes, that's right. Londonistan. That's right, Paul.
Londonistan. Yeah, she couldn't find a publisher, and it seems to be a sensible, well-researched book, but people are scared, and things are being closed down, and I think it's just a matter of time before they get all of us.
Before they eliminate, and I think you're right, that isn't scaremongering, because we've been, and maybe I should have seen it coming. I know one person who did see it coming, and that is the front man for liveleak.com, which is one of the world's biggest websites, huge website, gets millions of hits a day, and his name is Hayden Hewitt. He's a friend of mine, and he's based in Manchester. And to his credit, Paul, he saw that coming, but he didn't have the platform then that he has now. And he was warning people who, people were getting rid of their websites because they had a Facebook page. And they thought, well, I don't need a website anymore. I will just get a Facebook page, and then my supporters or readers can find me on a daily basis. People thought the same thing about YouTube and Google. But Hayden was warning people years ago that what they were doing, Paul, was they were getting us all into the one digital place, getting us all into the same place, and then they could say, Mr. Paul Craig Roberts, interesting theory you have there about Congress and about Zionism. Well, you can post it if you want, Mr. Roberts, but we will make sure, using our sophisticated algorithms, that only a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of people see it. Whereas previously, many more people would have seen it because we just go to paulcraigroberts.org. Now, you've kept your website because you're not stupid, but most people did that. They've kind of kettled us, to use that term, put us all into the one room, and then they can pick us off one by one. And it's coming down the line here. I know you're aware of this, Paul, but they want to bring in all sorts of new hate speech legislation in the UK for online. And that could be anything like me saying, for example, well, I don't believe that a transgender woman, a man who believes that he's a woman, I don't believe that he should be allowed go into a woman's prison, or that he should be allowed go and change with women at the swimming pool. That can be decreed by somebody as hate speech, and my Twitter account and my YouTube account can just be closed like that. And of course my YouTube account, with 80,000 subscribers and 20 million views, was shut down back in February anyway. I've got a new one. What are we going to do about it, sir? We're going to just have to keep sticking with our own websites, aren't we? And promote things. As you wrote in your article, people are going to have to support people like you. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's right. And also, I think what has to happen is either some other countries or some other entrepreneurs have to produce competition for Facebook and Twitter. I think there are. I think there are other such things. There are alternatives to YouTube. They're just not known and widely used. And so it seems to me that it's something that I think the Russians and Chinese should do. Of course, they want to control explanations too. That's the problem. But I think it works against them to do that. So there has to be somebody other than Google, Bezos, or the Amazon guy, or they've got to be other people who will not use the portals for censorship. But you see, I think most of these organizations like Amazon, like Google, Apple, they've got government contracts. They are actually working on programs to control information with the United States government. So when you get this, and these are all monopolies in a way, they're monopolies in the sense that this the brand name that's known and people flock to, even though there are alternatives. And so they basically can decide, okay, we're closing these down, these down, these down. And then that intimidates others who don't want to be closed down, so they pull back and become very much less outspoken and much more hesitant and more careful. And this is the way it seems to be developing.
Yeah, it is. And you mentioned there about the monopoly. There was a platform one time many years ago called Daily Motion. You might remember it, Paul. It was a video sharing website called Daily Motion. Now, it still exists. But when that started off, YouTube wasn't owned by Google. So YouTube was independent. It was started by 3 guys. And anyway, so you had a couple of different file sharing, video sharing sites. But then Google acquired YouTube. And the first thing it did then was, because Google is the biggest search engine in the world, it made it difficult for people to find Daily Motion. And it basically killed it. And that's what we're seeing now. You're right. There are new video sharing platforms coming out, but Google has got a monopoly. It's outrageous even that Google was allowed to buy YouTube at the time. It should have been anti-competitive and it should have been stopped in its tracks, you know. But yeah, people are going to have to, if they want independent, completely objective and untainted reporting by you and by others, ultimately it comes down to they're going to have to find a couple of bucks a month, which isn't even the price of a cup of coffee, Paul. It's as simple as that. You've got thousands of readers. If every one of them said, I tell you what, I'm going to give PCR, I'm going to give them $1 every month, it's game over. And if every time somebody downloads, you know, a program that they like, not necessarily this one, but any other program, and they find it to be accurate and fair and true, send them a couple of bucks. You know, we shouldn't be ashamed of asking for it, is the point I'm making. I thought your article was brilliant, Paul. These are terrifying times, you know.
Yes, it is. And what is happening in the United States is, see, the government can't itself very easily violate the First Amendment, the Free Speech Amendment, the Constitution, but it can hide behind private corporations on the grounds that, well, the private company can decide who it wants to do business with. And so the government then can use Google and Facebook to violate the First Amendment without having to do it itself, without having to go in and shut down somebody because they don't approve of what they're saying. But this is difficult for the government to do. But so they use Google, they use Facebook, they use Twitter.
You think
whatever.
It's a charade, Paul? When you see Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook sitting in front of a congressional committee, I think what you're saying is you think this might be a charade. And if that's what you are saying, I agree with you. We're supposed to believe that there's a conflict, that on the one hand, Facebook is trying to defend the right to privacy of its users and their right to have opinions on whatever. And it looks like the government is coming down on Facebook, but you think the reality might be somewhat different, that these organisations might be more than happy to collude with governments to make life difficult for independent speech.
Oh, they do. I mean, isn't it Amazon that has the $600 million contract with the CIA?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So, yeah, of course they collude. But they're colluding, to what extent the Congress is in on it, as opposed to the executive branch, where all the agendas reside. I don't know. I mean, the Congress could actually be trying to look into it. I don't think they'll be successful. I think the Congress and the courts in the United States lost considerable power during the Cheney-Bush regime. I think there was a huge setback for judicial review. There's a huge setback in Congress's authority because of this claim that the president has unaccountable powers. he has powers that aren't subject to restraint by the other two equal branches. They're not equal because they no longer can constrain the president. In other words, the Constitution gives Congress the power to decide to go to war. Well, the president, the executive branch, has taken that away. It decides. And it's taken away judicial review. All the executive branch has to say is national security.
Every time. It works like a charm. By the way, Hayden Hewitt, the liveleak.com co-founder, is listening to this, and he says decentralization with positive networking tools is an answer. He says currently everybody wants a Facebook replacement. Why would that be any different in the end? Hayden is basically saying that it's kind of like a self-perpetuating nightmare, that you might get a replacement for Facebook, but it will eventually go the way of Facebook. Decentralization is the answer, he reckons. Do you want to come back on that, Paul?
You know, he knows more about it than I do.
And me. And you and I put together.
I hope somebody who does know about it takes the lead in this. It's not, I'm not very knowledgeable about the digital world and all these ways of having this information. But I think he is right that in the end, Google would buy the alternative to Facebook.
Yeah.
And if Google didn't have the money, the Black Ops group would find it somewhere. CIA would siphon off some of its drug money and get it into Google. And so that's the case. You see, I think also what we're seeing everywhere, Richie, you see all over Europe, you see it all the United States, there's a huge disrespect for democracy. They simply do not want the people to decide. Trump's election was a democratic election. He got elected by the people, not by the vested interests. He wasn't elected by Wall Street and the Israel lobby and the military security complex and agribusiness. He got elected by all the people between the coast. You see, and so the elites here, they can't stand that. They don't want that. Now, look what's happening in the EU. You know, Hungary says, hey, with only 10 million of us, we don't want to become a Muslim country. And so the EU is now making all these threats. And there are all these people in the EU now saying, oh, we can't have Orban. We can't have him elected. Something's wrong with democracy. If it elects a populist, then we don't want democracy. We only want it if it elects us. You're seeing these kinds of statements come out of EU officials now. So there's really no respect for democracy in the West. They don't want it. They like this rule by tight-knit groups. And they intend to keep it. That's what this assault on Trump's all about. It's to teach anybody else in the future, hey, don't get elected by the people. We won't tolerate it. They'll say, look what happened to Trump. We'll do the same thing to you. So I think in a real sense that people have lost control and they can't get it back by voting because the candidates they're allowed to vote for are not going to represent them anyhow. And Trump is the spoiler in this. And this guy in Hungary is a spoiler. And so they're out after both of them. So I think the whole democracy is dead in the West.
And they go willingly. I mean, you've been very honest about Trump, and I know you were optimistic when Trump was on the campaign trail, as were many men and women like you who know the score. I find these guys just go the way of the Israeli lobby or the globalist lobby, and I don't trust the League movement in Italy, the five-star movement, and I don't trust Orban, because I think when all is said and done, like Alexis Tsipras did in Greece, they ultimately always sell out their people anyway, which is only repeating what you just hinted at there, Paul. Anyway, democracy is dead. Left, right, it's just an illusion.
I'm not sure I agree with you about Orban or Trump. You know, I wasn't optimistic I was pessimistic because I said Trump will not know the issues. He won't know who to support. Who to appoint. He won't be able to put a government in place that will have the ability to support him. And what has happened to Trump is he's just been beat up and forced to back down. I don't think he sold out. He just didn't have any choice. They're going to impeach him. They're going to do what to him? And this is what they're trying to do to Orban. And the fellow in Greece, I forget his name now, but the Greek people, that's the Greek people's fault. They never gave him more than 35% of the vote. So if you've only got 35% of the vote, you think the EU is going to pay any attention to you, or the IMF, or the big German banks? They ain't going to pay any attention to you. And if the Greeks had given him 65, 75% of the vote, it would have been a different story. He could have stood up. But, how is this one guy in Greece going to stand up against all of that might?
Well, he did say, if you remember, Paul, and I covered this extensively, Tsipras did say, along with Varoufakis at the time, let's stick our fingers up to the EU. Let's say no to the bailout terms. And they had a referendum, and Tsipras told the Greek people to vote no to the terrible bailout terms. And he said, we'll stand by you, we'll stand up for you. And the Greek people trusted him, and they voted no. And next thing, Varoufakis disappeared and off the face of the earth. And Tsipras went and signed terms that were actually worse than the initial terms. And
look, Richie, he's one guy.
I know that. Look, I'm not going to argue with you, but you and I, we've been going over this for years. Yeah.
Support. And the Greek people didn't want to leave the euro. Well, if you don't want to leave the euro, you can't have an independent country.
Absolutely.
And so this is the trouble with all of them, with Italy, with Greece. They gave up their currency. At least the British had too much sense to do that. They kept the pound.
Paul,
that's the only reason you're not in the same fix.
Just before we're just about to run out of time for today. It's flown by like it always does. Just in the 2 minutes we have remaining, on this Theresa May and this Chequers plan that she wants to agree with the European Union, and I've gone through the Chequers plan, it basically keeps the United Kingdom under the jackboot of the European Union. It makes us leave, but in name only. You said that she was pretty useless earlier on. You were quite right. You could have said a lot worse than that. How do you see this playing out? Do you ultimately see do you see a future where the UK is just not going to leave at all, or is it going to have a kind of like a pretend leave, like we leave but we're really still attached to all the institutions? Where's this one going to end up?
Well, I think we've talked about this a long time ago.
We have.
I never believed that the UK could get out, or that they would be allowed to. So, yes, if they keep them in and they pretend they're out, yeah, they'll cover it up in some way.
Keep us, keep us.
Yeah.
Like the umbilical cord won't be cut. That's the way it's going. Folks, if you haven't checked Paul's website out, paulcraigroberts.org, check it out today. Paul writes daily, pretty much daily, articles about these geopolitical events. Obviously, his credentials are impeccable. He's a former US Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, an author and a brilliant journalist in his career as well. Check him out. He's completely independent. His opinions are his own, and he's meticulously well briefed. Support him if you can. If you are reading him regularly, you should be sending a couple of bucks through PayPal or through the website there. There is a donate button. It's always a pleasure, Paul. I know you've got more to do today, so thanks for coming on, and I'm sure we'll catch up in a few weeks or so.
Well, Richie, I appreciate you, and you keep your show going. It's a very important show.
Thank you very much, Paul. Brilliant to have Paul Craig Roberts back on the programme. paulcraigroberts.org. Thank you, Paul. We'll leave it there for today with him. It's 2 minutes past the hour. Packed programme. If you missed my conversation earlier on with Susanne Small, it's now on YouTube. Don't go running off to listen to it just yet. I'm still going to be here till 7 p.m. I'm not going anywhere. I've got Jim Lee coming on the programme in a minute. Top man is Jim. We're going to be talking about weather modification history. Really interesting stuff. I've been browsing weathermodificationhistory.com and Jim's own website, Climate Viewer. I'm going to talk to him about that. He joins me in a few minutes' time. But Suzanne Small is currently detained at a mental health facility in Surrey, effectively because she sent materials by way of email to her doctor after she'd spoken with her doctor about her concerns about radiation, Wi-Fi radiation, 5G and all the rest of it. She conceded to me, did Suzanne, that she might have been, a bit using terms like genocide and Agenda 21, but she was honest about what she feels is happening, and she's now being evaluated. She's been sectioned, and that interview came about because Ian sent me a tweet with a link to a little video that she managed to do because they left her in possession of her phone. I have contacted the hospital. I have determined that Suzanne is real. I spoke with her in an off-air what you would call a pre-interview before that, and everything was hunky-dory. I was satisfied that she was telling me the truth. She is telling me the truth, and it's rather bizarre and rather Orwellian. That interview is now on YouTube. Quite incredible. Busy old day today. Very quick break. Back with plenty more in a couple of minutes. Follow me on Twitter. It's at Richie Allen Show on Twitter now.
Have you lost access to important data from a computer hard drive, mobile phone, or other storage device? Maybe you have a broken hard drive containing years of information, or a smartphone that no longer works from which you'd like the pictures, movies, and chats recovered. If you would like to recover data from any type of digital device, including desktop and laptop computers, external hard drives, cameras, smartphones, NAS, and RAID servers, then contact Data Clinic today at dataclinic.co.uk now.
There's a place high in the mountains of Spain, a sanctuary where souls gather from all around the globe to learn about themselves and experience powerful changes in the way we see our world. They become awakened to their gifts and their power to heal others. Become part of this ever-growing worldwide family of unique, pure energy healing practitioners. Discover how amazing you truly are. Go to www.markbayerski.com. It could just change your life forever. Forever.
Welcome back to the most listened to independent radio show in Europe. It's your Richie Allen Show.
Yes, and the response to the Suzanne Small. Why have I got Hall on the brain? Her name is Suzanne Small. She had to correct me, didn't she, Suzanne? I introduced her as Suzanne Small, but then I said Hall. It's Suzanne Small. The response to that interview has been pretty massive. There have been hundreds of comments already on the YouTube video, people expressing skepticism, and that's okay. You're entitled to be skeptical. Some people suggesting that Suzanne might be conveniently leaving out parts of the story. I did ask her that. It's important to note that she's never been sectioned and has never been treated by a doctor or by a psychiatric professional for depression or for anything in the past. Very articulate, very smart woman, presented her own little video very well and spoke very well and very eloquently with me earlier on. And she's adamant that having spoken, she spoke with, it was three, wasn't it? Three, yes. And said, look, there's a great big old mast that's just appeared. And three confirmed that it was their mast. And they said it was about increasing coverage. And she asked them about 5G, and they wouldn't confirm or deny that it had anything to do with 5G. They just said it was increasing coverage and all of that. She said that she'd begun to feel a bit unwell at that time, as had a friend of hers, took it to her GP, spoke to her. The GP wasn't interested. That might be a bit unfair. The GP was obviously interested in her having a headache and wanting to treat it, but the GP didn't seem too interested in radiation from cell phone or mobile phone masts, wasn't interested. So undeterred, Suzanne went away and began emailing the GP. And this is where it seems there was a problem, because the GP has determined that she's unwell for believing this stuff, for being interested in this stuff, and for talking about genocidal agendas. Agenda 21, Agenda 30, depopulation agendas. And has sent some people around to speak to Suzanne. She wouldn't speak to them. She wouldn't let them in the house. They went away, and then the cavalry came back. Mental health people, ambulances, and the police, and they took her away against her will. Like I said earlier on, I can sympathise with the doctor, even though I wouldn't agree with it. The doctor doesn't believe any of this stuff. Millions and millions of people don't believe any of this stuff, and that is their right. They genuinely don't believe it. They don't want to believe it. And they don't believe it. And they can quite rightly say to me or to you, where's your evidence? And we don't believe it. I don't agree with it. And I believe when the government says, or when the Department of the Environment says that this technology is okay, I believe them. That is their right. I think that the doctor is in this category and genuinely felt that Suzanne was maybe a bit under the weather. It's not right. I think maybe she genuinely felt that. And thinking, well, if I feel that somebody might be a little bit down, a little bit depressed, a little bit obsessed with something, if I genuinely feel that, I have a duty to explore it further. It's too easy to beat the doctor up. Say the doctor is evil, even though, or because, I should say, because we agree with Suzanne. Because we're also concerned about this stuff. But the doctor obviously isn't. And that's the way the world works. So we'll obviously update. I will update you as Suzanne keeps me updated. Fascinating stuff today. And obviously, you know, you've got to have great sympathy for her being in that situation. So anyway. So in a couple of minutes' time, I'm going to be speaking with none other than Jim Lee. Sent Jim a request there. And he'll be with me in a couple of minutes' time. We're going to be talking about the history of weather modification. Hugely interesting that. Not all the more so because of recent extreme weather events in the United States, in the Philippines, in China, and some might say here in the UK, where we're expected to get absolutely battered by high winds tomorrow, although we pretty much don't get anything like the weather systems they get in other parts of the world. So then, I've been on with you since 4:30. We've not had any music. I'm going to take a break and play you some music from the New Radicals on the Richie Allen Show, live on Cogent Radio, triggerwarning.tv, richieallen.co.uk, Fab Radio and TuneIn Radio. My name is Richie Allen. Jim Lee joins me in a minute. So stay with me, on air with you till 7 as usual. Music from the New Radicals on your Richie Allen Show, 12 minutes past the hour, 12 minutes past 6 as I do this. It's just after 12 minutes past 1 on the East Coast there in the US. Massive amount of tweets on Dr. Paul Craig Roberts and Susanne Small. Follow what people are telling me on Twitter by going to twitter.com, and where it says search Twitter, put Richie Allen Show in, press enter, and you'll see the tweets. Now, extreme weather events, and of course we have them all the time, and they are on the increase. And over the last few days, we've seen them in the United States, in the Philippines, and in China. And people often ask me about weather modification, the ability to engineer weather systems, to create new ones, and to enhance existing ones. And a remarkable coincidence, really. Before Sunday morning's programme, I was on YouTube and I came across weathermodificationhistory.com, and I found it brilliant. I found it a terrific resource for anybody who wants to get into this from a starting point. And I also found some YouTube videos where they had recorded weathermen and weatherwomen who were doing Q&As with their audiences. And when the audiences would ask about weather modification, most times the weatherman or weatherwoman from the TV station would get very sarcastic or very rude and would shut down the conversation. So I'm delighted to be joined by my guest this hour. And he spent many years trying to understand weather modification historically, where it all began and where it all started. He's spoken at conferences all around the United States of America. He's got his own website. It's climateviewer.com. That's climateviewer.com. And he's a regular guest on independent and commercial talk radio programs. Hugely interesting man. Let's welcome to the show Mr. Jim Lee. Jim, you're very welcome. How are you?
Great. Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for doing it. I'm so glad I found weathermodificationhistory.com, and I found that wonderful video of all of these weathermen and weatherwomen, Jim, shutting down any questions about weather modification history. It was fabulous, wonderful stuff. It made me laugh. Before we go right back, Jim, to how you got into it, do you think these weathermen and women, most of them, do you think are genuine? They genuinely don't know, or do they know that something is up and they've been told to keep it stum, keep quiet? What do you think, Jim?
I would lean towards the ignorance part more than it's, a big government conspiracy. And I know that that's not a popular answer, but the truth of the matter is, this past January, I went to the American Meteorological Society's 98th annual meeting. And at that AMS meeting, they had a weather modification conference. It was called the 21st Conference on Planned and Inadvertent Weather Modification. And it was being held upstairs. There were people talking about controlling the weather. And I was down on the floor, where they have all the booths and everything like that, talking to Raytheon and the United States Naval Research Lab about HARP and, just doing a general audience poll of all of these university grads and people who are going into meteorology. None of them had a clue about what I was talking about. And, I'm a good BS detector. And I can tell whether somebody's trying to be, like they're trying to obfuscate or whatever. But genuinely, they were shocked and interested and wanted to know more. So it does not surprise me in the least that people who go to college to study meteorology, they just kind of leave that section out.
Of course they do. Of course. That's a great answer, Jim. You're absolutely right. We can't exist. We can't grow as people if we assume that everybody is in on everything. It's not the case. It's silly, and it's not, it's not in any way conducive to learning. I'm fascinated that the defense contractors genuinely didn't know anything about it. And when you were telling them, listen, weather modification, engineering the weather is real, did they dismiss you as quirky, as a bit of a nut, Jim, or did they listen?
No, they the videos you saw were all Facebook videos. So generally there's some meteorologist just taking questions from the gallery, and they the responses range from weather modification history. Oh no, we'll have none of that. I'm gonna ban him. I just banned somebody to one of my favorite guys. I think his name is George Flickinger or something like that.
Yes, yeah.
Who was just not only educated about it, went on at length about it. He's like, I've actually flown in one of the planes doing silver iodide testing, and we asked him about is Hurricane Florence being modified? And he says, well, they did do that back in the 70s. I'm, like floored. Here's a guy who actually knows something about weather modification history. And, he goes on to say, and did they modify this one? Well, they would never tell us, So, I mean, there's different levels to this, like some people just, I think, are feigning ignorance. But the vast majority of even meteorologists have no clue about the 200-year history of weather modification. So that's why I created weathermodificationhistory.com in partnership with my Canadian brother, Dominic Marama. I live in Sumter, South Carolina, United States. He lives up in Canmore, Alberta, Canada. And he actually went through like Google newspapers and, different newspaper sources on the internet and compiled right now on weathermodificationhistory.com. We have 791 newspaper articles about weather modification dating from 1891 to present. And, when you look at the body of evidence that we've collected, it's being cited by, Harvard, MIT, the United Nations Environmental Program, an institute in Pakistan, Islamabad, that was really upset about the possibility of weather warfare. I've got a guy from Iran, a documentarian from Iran right now wants to interview me because just recently, Brigadier General from Iran said that Europe was stealing Iran's rain. And, that Israel was involved and other nations nearby. Well, nearby is the United Arab Emirates Rainfall Enhancement Program. They're actually offering like $1 to $2 million to each of the contestants to bring rain to their, desert land. And, I listened to a popular radio show guy here in America, Rush Limbaugh. And, he's like, there's no possibility this could ever happen. I went and I talked to my chief meteorologist here at the EIB Excellence in Broadcasting Network. And he said, we can't even tell when clouds are going to be made, let alone steer them. Wow. And they're missing the whole point. And this is documented history. In 1969 through 70, Cuba, the CIA did a rain embargo on Cuba, and that's the Central Intelligence Agency in America. They got together with the U.S. Air Force, U.S. Navy, and they did cloud seeding, which is where you sprinkle chemicals into clouds to make rain fall. Well, they did it in the Gulf of Mexico so that the rain fell in the ocean, not on the island. And then you flash forward to Chernobyl. During the Chernobyl meltdown, Moscow did cloud seeding over Belarus so that the radioactive clouds didn't rain on Moscow. They rained on Belarus. As a result, many people there developed major cancerous lesions and all of that sort of thing. So that was a way to prevent rainfall from coming somewhere. Then you go forward to 2008 in the Olympics in China. They were using rockets and cannons to fire chemicals into the sky, in addition to liquid nitrogen to spray the clouds to keep them from rain from falling on the Olympic Village and their huge stadium, which did not have a roof. So weather modification can be used to create rain, to create more rain, but also to deny rain, which means that it can be used by governments and militaries of the world to deny fresh water to countries. So Iran's claim that, their water was being stolen by European countries and Israel and countries nearby isn't that crazy.
I was just going to ask you, Jim, obviously I was going to take you back to that because this is a geopolitical show as much as anything else. And I've been speaking with former U.S. Assistant Secretary to the Treasury, Paul Craig Roberts, before you about Iran and Israel and Syria and the United States. And you've been asked to speak to the Iranians who believe that their rain is being denied them, their rain is being stopped. And I suppose you were just coming to it anyway. You might have some sympathy with their claim.
Yeah, I mean, as much as, Iran, the government of Iran is clearly the enemy of my country. The people of Iran are not my enemy. So, I told my father about this. He's like, don't you do that interview. And,
right.
I'm still up in the air on whether I will or not. But at the same time, it's the people who are affected. When you're talking about, weather warfare, it's not the government so much that's going to be affected as the poor farmers and the individuals, So for those who don't know, America did weather warfare over Vietnam in 1967 to 72, and it was all led by Henry Kissinger, globalist, technocrat, Bilderberger, Trilateral Commission, Club of Rome, that guy. So Henry Kissinger got with the CIA once again, And they used the U.S. Air Force and Navy to do rainfall precipitation enhancement cloud seeding over Vietnam, for 5 years using only 5 planes. They didn't even tell the Secretary of Defense. So it was such a secret program that not even the top military official in the United States military knew about it. And it only came to light because of a reporter named Jack Anderson who saw a note on Lyndon Johnson, our president's desk, that said continue weather modification operations over Laos.
Fascinating.
And then as a result, there were 3 hearings in Congress, and Russia and America agreed to ban weather warfare. And that was called the Environmental Modification Convention, or the Prohibition of Hostile Environmental Modification Techniques. It was in 1978. My problem is that even though weather warfare was banned in 1978, there is still to this day no way to catch somebody being hostile.
There's no way to detect it.
Yeah, exactly. So I've come up with a solution, which is available at climateviewer.com/NMOD. That's ENMOD. And it's called.
Hey Jim, just before you get into that solution, I really want to hear about this. A couple of things I want to say, because my listeners will be absolutely killing me for not doing this. But then I say to my listeners, it's nice to have people on the program who disagree with me. You know what my opinion is on the Iran thing. I sympathise and understand with your father and what he would think about Iran. Listen, my grandfather would think the same thing about Iran. I've got a lot of sympathy with the Iranians. A lot of sympathy. Look, there's a lot of things going on in that country I don't like, human rights issues and stuff. But in terms, no doubt about it. But in terms of geopolitically and as a threat to the rest of the world, I believe it's a nonsense. I believe it's a country that hasn't attacked anybody in 500 years. And you and I both know that BP, the CIA, and British intelligence overthrew a secular leader of that country back in 1953, and so on. So I just want to put that out there, just in the interest of balance. I don't agree with that characterization of Iran, but I absolutely respect your right to think what you want about it. I'm just fascinated that they think that their reign is being denied.
I have a little bit more background. I'm also an IT guy. I'm a little bit of a hacker. I'm a retired bad hacker. Let's just put it that way. And in the hacking world, Iran hacked one of our stealth drones and paraded it all over town and everything like that.
I believe you, no doubt.
And there's no doubt that the people that are controlling the country are constantly saying death to America, death to Israel. So if the people in control want to try to push that narrative that they want to kill Americans, then they are, by their own admission, becoming enemies of America. So
they have a lot, Jim. They do have a lot to be cheesed off at America and Israel for. I think they play to their base. When you get these leaders like Ahmadinejad, particularly because Rouhani is obviously been a bit more of a moderate up to a point, but these guys often say stuff to appease their own people. But historically,
Agreed.
That's what I think. I don't think they're a threat. I think we allow, Western countries, we allow Israel away with murder, and I support the right of Israelis to exist in peace, and but equally I support the rights of the Palestinians not to have to put up with the destroying of their homes and all of that. Look, I try to be pretty fair on it, but I just wanted to throw it in there. I don't want to distract us from what we're talking about, which is hugely important anyway. There is one thing that makes me laugh though, Jim. 1978, the treaty you talked about. Do you know what makes me laugh more than anything about that?
Tell me.
Ireland signed it. I'm Irish, Jim. I'm from Waterford. Jim, we've got 5 boats in our navy, and we're standing with the big boys signing treaties promising not to modify weather. It just made me laugh, Jim.
Well, to be clear now, it does not ban weather modification. In fact, it says that peaceful uses of weather modification are still completely legal. What it does ban is military or hostile weather modification that has long-lasting or damaging effects to property or whatever like that. So it has some very specific language in it that only bans a certain type of weather modification that they consider hostile, long-lasting, or severe. with, environmental modification techniques as the method of damage of property and yada, yada. So the problem with this law is that in order to catch somebody being hostile, you first have to say, tell me what your intent is. And right now, there is no global weather modification reporting requirements. In America, following the NMOD ban, we passed something called the Weather Modification Reporting Act of 1972. So anybody in America that modifies the weather has to report it to the government, specifically NOAA and the Department of Commerce. I've mapped all of those out on climateviewer.org. I have a 3D map, climateviewer.org. And it's, I have a mobile map as well for those who can't use the fancy 3D globe. But you can see the actual weather modification reports from America, who did it, when they did it, who paid for it, why they did it, what chemicals were used, all of that. What's necessary to really fix the problem is that on a global scale, and the World Meteorological Organization kind of did this for a little while, but they really don't keep up on their records anymore. And they have a WMO expert team on weather modification, and they are supposed to keep track of all of this sort of stuff, but it's not public. So what I'm demanding is an update to NMOD that says twofold. One, that you must give at least a 48-hour notice prior to doing any kind of weather modification. Tell us what you're going to do, why you're going to do it, and where, and all of the details. That way, if somebody causes a tornado, flash flood, you can at least sue them in a court of law. And they can say, I wasn't hostile. I was trying to be, we were doing this for good purposes, yada, yada. But in order to catch the hostile actors, because militaries and governments are not going to report their activities, the CIA is not going, or the KGB, or China's, PLA. So what we have to do is be able to weed out who's hostile and who's not. So by requiring everybody in the worldwide simultaneously, to report their weather modification atmospheric experiments in advance, we build a system of sensors, both one citizen-powered and one government-sponsored, so that there's a check and balance system there. Because, whenever Fukushima happened, we have the EPA's RADNet, which is supposed to detect radiation. They just shut it off. So I don't want the government to be able to control the only sensor network that detects radiation, and then when we have a massive radiation event, just shut it off. So I propose we have a two-part sensor system, one citizen-powered and one government-powered, so that we can detect when people are being hostile. If you didn't tell us you're going to modify the weather, and then we see your planes out there spraying God knows what, and then hostile weather occurs, that we can go back and look at the data and say, these were, U.S. Air Force planes doing it, or these were Chinese military planes or Russian military planes that did this. Or they were HARP, like ionospheric heaters, like the one in, Gakona, Alaska, that's actually HARP, and the one in Puerto Rico, the one in Surrey, Russia, the one in China, there is one in Japan. So these ionospheric heaters, whenever we need to know when people are modifying the sky overhead so that we can actually see the results. And if you were being hostile, then you finally have violated NMOD. That's really the only way to make this law work. And it's the best we can hope for is a little bit of transparency, and then trust but verify. We build sensors to catch people who didn't tell us they were going to modify the weather.
Jim, let me just remind our listeners, Jim Lee is our guest this hour. Jim is going to be with me for another 20 minutes. And you can find Jim at climateviewer.com, but weathermodificationhistory.com. The Climate Viewer guy is one of Jim's monikers. Fascinating stuff, this. He's brilliantly briefed on this, is Jim, he's been looking into this for many, many years. Our listeners, Jim, and we entertain all sorts of theories on this program. We talk about things that, maybe mainstream commercial television and radio programs ignore. We talk about, the possibility that these very extreme weather events that cause a lot of catastrophe, that they could have started by way of manipulation, or that something dangerous but not, so bad was actually accelerated or helped along. And our listeners look at things that have happened in recent years and they think, I wonder, is there any evidence, Jim, to appease my listeners, to suggest that yes, in recent years, some very, very extreme hurricanes that have caused a lot of damage may have been because somebody was interfering?
Certainly. One thing that I find ironic here in America is that we actually went through like a 10-year drought of major hurricanes making landfall. And it coincides with Barack Obama coming into office in 2008. In 2008, the Department of Homeland Security had a hurricane modification workshop where they invited scientists from all around the world to come in and give proposals on how to do hurricane mitigation. And they proposed things like seeding them with salt, monolayer films like putting oil on the surface of the ocean to cut off evaporation, using cloud ionizers. The big one, though, is using soot or carbon black dust. Now, this goes all the way back to 1976 with Gray et al., William Gray. The paper was called Carbon Black Dust Absorption of Solar Energy. And they talked about dumping soot into a hurricane because it's black and it's a cloud seed, that the sun would heat that black soot. And if you heat a certain portion of a hurricane, you could possibly steer it. So you flash forward to 2008 at the Department of Homeland Security workshop from MIT University, Dr. Mash Alamaro brought up the same idea. Hey, we can dump soot into the plane, into the hurricanes. Well, on weathermodificationhistory.com, I have two FOIAs, they're Freedom of Information Act requests from the government, one from the U.S. Air Force, one from the U.S. Navy, and both mention using carbon black dust to do weather modification. Following the Owning the Weather in 2025 papers, which was 1995 and 96, in 1997, Dr. Arnold Barnes from the Phillips Lab, from the Air Force, Geophysics Directorate, gave a speech, a presentation at a joint Army Air Force meeting where he specifically said, carbon black dust weather modification, cloud seeding. And, he gave multiple reasons, the same reasons that they did in Vietnam and Cuba, to increase precipitation, to decrease precipitation. And then they went so far as to say to increase cirrus cloud cover, what is commonly referred to as chemtrails on the internet. So create clouds in the sky. And the reason they said they would do that was to block out satellites from space. Whoa, there's something you never thought of. So if you add all of this up, you have these hurricane hunter flights that are constantly zigzagging through the, hurricanes. And the military has expressed, the ability to use carbon black dust, for weather modification purposes. All of the militaries of the world, the major ones being U.S., Russia, and China, have perfected this art. So any one of them could use any combination of chemicals to either enhance or decrease the size or strength of a hurricane. I find it ironic that while Hurricane Florence was hitting America, there was a typhoon hitting China. It's almost like, who's going to have the bigger bat? And when
Jim,
you combine
sorry to interrupt you. That sounds like you've considered the possibility that the deep state, the state within a state in the US, has thrown a curveball weather-wise at the Chinese, who might have done something similar.
Oh, certainly. I mean, that's why it's so imperative for me that, we fix the NMOD law, because without strict verification, all of this is speculation. So the reason why I have so much credibility that I've built over 7 years is that I don't go out making definitives. You know what I mean? I speak to what I know is possible, and I say we need more proof. And when it comes down to it, there are many coincidences. And, in the state of Texas, for example, you can put a person in an electric chair and kill them, fry them to death with enough circumstantial evidence. But when we're talking about the government here and weather warfare, there's always plausible deniability. And there's very little data. You're not going to go to a plane, tracker radar 24 website and see all of the military flights. The CIA has its own airline. It's called Janet, just another non-existent terminal. Right. When you have governments that have secret airlines, they have military flights, they have the ability, they have the reason to do it. We're at war already. World War III started multiple years ago, 7, 8, 10 years ago, and it was a cyber war, an info war, and has been ongoing ever since. So China and America have been in economic warfare via cyber, attacks for multiple years. We attacked Iran's nuclear plant, joint Israel-American cyber bomb called Stuxnet to blow up their nuclear reactor. That our ionospheric heater, HARP, is capable of blowing up gas and pipelines. Gas and pipelines have blown up all over Iran. When all of these things are possible, of course they're going to look at you and say, put your tinfoil hat on, because you cannot prove
of course, Jim. Yeah.
But
here's a wacky conspiracy theory, Jim. Here's a wacky conspiracy theory. I've spoken a lot over the years to credible people, academic people, about allegations about the financial malfeasance of the Clintons and their pals in places like the Philippines and elsewhere. And somebody spoke to me once off air and said to me, Richie, you're interested in the notion that people have the technology to engineer weather systems and to wreak devastation on countries, on islands and what have you. And I said, yes. And they said, well, if you think that's possible, and if you also believe that foundations don't always go to disaster zones because they want to help, what they really want to do is they want to rape and pillage the natural resources of those countries, and they want to bring corporations into those countries to do the things that corporations do. And I said, yes, okay, I go along with that. And that this same person, who is an ex-politician, he can't be named, sadly, but he said to me, what about the possibility that those weather events were engineered for that very eventuality? Destroy a country with a natural weather event to give the pretext for the foundations to go in and do their thing. And I thought, well, that is a wacky conspiracy theory, but of course I couldn't dismiss it out of hand. I'm sure you've heard this type of thing before.
I don't think it's that wacky. In fact, you mentioned Hillary Clinton. Her campaign chairman, John Podesta, co-founded what's called the Energy Future Coalition Steering Committee in 2002. And just before the COP21, the Paris Accord agreement, they had a meeting where they said, look, we want to, make geoengineering a reality, but we can't talk about it till after COP21 fails. And it was set up to fail. And even in the legislation itself, basically, I read another paper in a scientific journals, countries have agreed to geoengineering whether they realized it or not. But Hillary Clinton's homeboy, John Podesta specifically, has a PAC, a political action committee called the Energy Future Coalition Steering Committee that supports this geoengineering activity. So you look at what happened in Haiti, and there are numerous reports of, Clinton Foundation officials flying children out of the off the island. And I don't want to get into the whole, pedo-gate and all of that. But if you follow, some very credible sources that I know, what we're going to find out in the end is that basically the Clinton Foundation is a, human trafficking ring.
It certainly is.
If you were.
Absolutely right. And thanks for saying
basically it works like this. The Silicon Valley guys that run, the Googles and the big tech companies, they allow all of these evil men that run countries that kill activists. If it weren't for Silicon Valley tech giants selling software to evil regimes, then they would actually be able to have a revolution in their country. But when you have companies like Finn Fisher, which sells a software that lets you break into a person's computer to track everything they're doing, and then they sell it to Gaddafi, and then Gaddafi uses it to kill any activist that opposes him in his own country, and then they kill Gaddafi, and then they find receipts for the Finn Fisher software in his burnt down building. You kind of get a clear picture of what's going on here. So at the end of the day, these corporatists, these technocrats, that want to use technology to control individuals, the weather is no different. They want to completely replace the water cycle with a technologically driven, you get rain, you do not. And that's been their 100-year agenda, and they're very close to achieving that. And I recently did a paper, Technocracy and the Water Wars. And in it, I talk about how they did this, and it's with destruction of the ocean, cutting down trees, and killing bacteria. And they replace that with artificial clouds, which come from planes and ship tracks. And finally, geoengineering. And geoengineering is the idea that you mimic a volcano to block out the sun. So if you spray chemicals high in the stratosphere, that you can control the Earth's temperature. And they make it all about global warming. But if you look at their paperwork, especially by Ben Kravitz and Alan Robach, what you'll realize is there's something called the Independent Integrated Assessment of Geoengineering Proposals. And what they all have in common is they're going to change rainfall patterns worldwide, which means there will be winners and losers. And losers meaning dead people in countries where it never rains again if they do geoengineering. So this is all about the control of resources and control of water. And if we're talking that nefarious a scheme, people want to talk about depopulation with nanobugs and holograms and, all of these things that are just so ethereal that they could never, ever be proven. But this is in your face that, we're going to use global warming as a pretext to do geoengineering. Oh, by the way, geoengineering will change rainfall patterns worldwide. Oh, by the way, Iran's already complaining that Europe's stealing its rain. Just wait till we pull off geoengineering, which Hillary Clinton's a supporter of. John Podesta has a PAC that specifically is pushing it.
Who are they working for, Jim? Because we've got about 3.5 minutes. I'll obviously be inviting you back on with your permission. I'd love to have you back on again in the near future, because there's so much more that we can get into. This is obviously above the pay grade of the CIA, of the NSA. This is some deep, dark stuff. Clinton is a front woman, as evil as she is, and she's properly evil. Who's behind them?
If you look at who's funding geoengineering, the top of the list is the National Science Foundation. Bill Gates has a super fund called FICER, the Fund for Innovative Climate Energy Research. The Royal Society's involved. These are all of these think tanks, you know what I mean? Council on Foreign Relations. All of these, if you track them back, it goes back to this ideology that is rooted in what's called technocracy. And if you haven't read the book by Patrick Wood, Technocracy Rising, it'll explain pretty much, once you understand what a technocrat is and what their ideology is, then you will understand that you've been saying Illuminati all this time when you're talking about the Trilateral Commission, the Club of Rome, the Bilderberger Group. All of these supranational unions are technocrat unions where they are believers in the church of science, not the church of religion. And they want government to be the only religion. And that government will be run by engineers and scientists, and they will rule the world through the scientific method. create a balanced load where they say you've used too much energy today. Your carbon credits are up for the day. Or you've used too much water for today. We're going to shut your water off for 4 hours. And that's what sustainable development, smart city, smart grid, smart technology, all of these things lead back to technocrats. And they're the ones funding it. So if you want to know who the problem is, bankers are the problem.
Absolutely.
Bankers and billionaires that go to these clubs that push their agenda through lobbying because they've got lapdogs like the Clintons who will, easily take a buck to screw anybody. And that's how it works all around the globe.
You know what, Jim? I had a rabbi from Manchester on the program last week, and he said these financial institutions, the Warburgs, Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the Oppenheimers, they're not Jews. They've got nothing to do with Judaism or Jews, and they hide behind their public perception of Jewishness in order to avoid scrutiny and criticism. They're not Jews, they're not even Zionists, they're way beyond that. That's what he said, and I had a lot of respect for that, because people often, they like to blame the Jews for everything, and it's ridiculous and it's short-sighted. It's got nothing to do with Jews. However, you might dislike, and I despise the Israeli government for what it does, but Jews don't do it, Jews don't support it, not any Jews I know anyway. This is way beyond that, and it is bankers. And these are I really believe this. I used to think this was crazy and bizarre and mad and foolish, but I just can't. I find myself in the last 5, 6, 7 years, I can't ignore the overwhelming evidence anymore. I meet men like you, learned men who approach things academically, reasonable, rational men. You present your evidence, and I can't ignore it. And it's happening, like you said, in front of our eyes. Unlike other things, you talked about the holographic stuff and the transhumanism, which is coming down the road. That can be theoretical to some people. They can't get a grip on it, but this is in your bloody face. It's right in front of your face.
It's over your head every day.
Yeah.
I mean, right now they are talking about doping jet fuel with sulfur while using biofuels for contrail control. So they're actually using two fuels in one plane to be able to switch clouds on and off from a supercomputer at the FAA or the ICAO, the European Union, and use alternative jet fuels to say, hey, let's not make clouds now. Let's make them here instead. And that's what they call accidental geoengineering.
And you've got all the proof of this, Jim. You on your website, this is the thing, because my listeners will be saying now, attack him, Richie. What's the proof? I've said before the conversation, I said it on Sunday, and I said it today. Everything Jim is saying is backed up by documentation which is shared on the websites he's just mentioned. There's no point in me wasting time arguing with Jim saying you can't prove it. He's got the documentation. Sorry, Jim. I
mean, if you try, I'll just go read you the scientific paper I quoted it from. Yeah. Plus, I interviewed the head of the FAA, Dr. Rangasai Halthori from the Aviation Climate Change Research Initiative, and he told me we want to make clouds by day, none by night. So they don't want to get rid of all of these chemtrails, these cirrus clouds that they're making. They want to make more of them. They just want to make them by day and not by night, because at night they trap heat. And the military wants to make clouds to block out satellites in space and make it darker. So when they do nighttime operations, their night vision gives them a distinct advantage. They did it over the Iraq. They made cirrus clouds everywhere, turned it, pitch black dark, and now suddenly they have a severe military advantage. These are the realistic reasons why you would make chemtrails everywhere. And I call them plane farts or artificial clouds. But at the end of the day, making artificial clouds with ship tracks and aviation pollution is, being used for multiple agendas by multiple different entities. And all of this leads back to we need transparency and verification. So that's why I have the Environmental Modification Accountability Act. It's available at climateviewer.com/NMOD, ENMOD. And you can read through it. I've even had two prominent geoengineers say, yeah, we should do this. And the top weather modification historian on the planet, James Roger Fleming, he said that this is a must. We must do this. So, I'm just, a self-educated man putting all this information out that I read and trying to be pragmatic about it and read between the lines, ignore the slave speak and give people, credible information and then come up with solutions. So what I encourage all of your listeners to do is ask yourself this. If you're listening to a person on YouTube, on radio, on anywhere, and they are scaring the hell out of you, but they are offering you no solutions, then they are an infotainer, not an activist. And I myself am an activist. And being an activist, I want to give people, a pragmatic way forward. And that's why I've come up with this solution. It's taken me 7 years to think of a solution that would, that even the industry would accept because it would be beneficial to them as well. So, I put a lot of thought into this, and I've already gained the support of even geoengineering scientists. And I hope to make it a reality in the near future. But you can go to weathermodificationhistory.com and see the 200-year history, and it'll at least, wet your nose.
Oh, without a doubt. Do you know, the best thing that happened last weekend was stumbling across the website. It was brilliant. And then I mentioned it on a Sunday morning program. And I was getting dozens of tweets and emails from people who'd gone onto the website. Now, a lot of my listeners knew about it already, which pisses me off. They might have let me know about it sooner, and we could have had this conversation sooner. But it was fantastic to see that. Also, a brilliantly made point there about doing this from a solutions point of view, not trying to, because there is a lot of money in fear porn, and sadly in the independent media there are a lot of programs, some of them very successful, who live on scaring the bejesus out of people.
And fear, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, from the MK Ultra experiments on, they have understood that you can control people through lying, through keeping them in a constant state of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And, people use it to sell products. Hey, she's going to be skinnier than you. Aren't you scared? They use it for the independent media uses it. We call it clickbait, the scary titles. And people are driven by fear. And the opposite of fear is hope and love. And what I try to do is give people hope by saying, no, the world is not going to end next month or in 2 years. You're not going to die. We can fix this. I know the legal system is completely screwed, but if we all get educated on this subject, then we can do something about it. But it's going to take people, really wanting to learn.
And to open their minds. Jim, we've 3 minutes to get out, so I've got to get out of the program. ClimateViewer.com is go to climateviewer.com, but go to weathermodificationhistory.com. Find Jim on Twitter as well. I tweet a link to where you can find him on Twitter. Jim, that was absolutely magnificent. It was thought-provoking and deep and interesting. I've learned a lot there, and I know my listeners do, because if you go onto the Twitter feed, you'll see yourself we've had dozens of tweets on this, and I look forward to inviting you back on the program in a few weeks' time if you'll come back on, and we'll make it a longer segment. We'll do 90 minutes. We'll get rightly stuck into it. Really appreciate it, Jim.
That would be great, and I would greatly appreciate it. Any opportunity to try to spread the truth and get past these fear porn artists, because they dominate the share, portion of the internet. Most people aren't interested in the truth. And I'll leave you with a quote from Carl Sagan. One of the saddest lessons of history is this: if we've been bamboozled long enough, we tend to reject any evidence of the bamboozle. We're no longer interested in finding out the truth. The bamboozle has captured us. It's simply too painful to acknowledge, even to ourselves, that we've been taken. Once you give a charlatan power over you, you almost never get it back. But I counter that with, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has.
Fantastic way to end, Jim. Thanks for your time today. ClimateViewer.com, folks. WeatherModificationHistory.com. Jim, let's do it again soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Richie. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely brilliant stuff, important stuff, and positive stuff from Jim there. Jim Lee, ClimateViewer.com and WeatherModificationHistory.com. That's it for the program. Massive thanks to our guests today, to Suzanne Small, to Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, and to Jim Lee there. Brilliant stuff. We'll do it all again tomorrow at 5 p.m. UK time on the usual channels. It's 5 p.m. UK time. richieallen.co.uk, Fab Radio 2 in Manchester. We're on TuneIn Radio, and we're on the Cogent Radio app too. See you tomorrow. Bye now.